Sarah's husband had embezzled company funds and run away, only to unexpectedly drown along the way. She not only covered his deficit and paid off his debts to the factory, but also devotedly served her mother-in-law for 15 years. 15 years later, her mother-in-law passed away peacefully. Before closing her eyes, she left Sarah the family townhouse. Yet, Sarah's husband suddenly returned with his mistress. "It's my house. What gives you the right to take it?" She refused to give it up. He then plastered posters all over the neighborhood, fabricating stories about her having affairs with other men. The vicious gossip of the entire apartment complex pushed Sarah to the brink, forcing her to throw herself into a well to end her life. Hey everyone. Imagine getting a second chance after your cheating husband fakes his death and ruins your life. Our female lead doesn't just get mad, she gets even. Let's see how she completely flips the script. Opening her eyes again, Sarah found herself transported back to the exact day her husband had supposedly drowned. Her mother-in-law was wailing, saying that with her son dead, she no longer wanted to live. Sarah immediately pulled over the bachelor butcher from next door, Jack, and offered him her husband's factory position. "Jack, I'll give you my husband's job. In return, you marry my mother-in-law and move in with her, okay?" "Oh, my son, why did you leave me like this?" Hearing her mother-in-law, Mary, sobbing loudly, Sarah's whole body trembled. Immediately after, memories flooded back like a tidal wave. In the fall of 1983, David took advantage of his position as a purchasing agent for the textile mill to embezzle $3,000 of company funds. $3,000 in those days was enough for an ordinary worker to scrimp and save, working themselves to the bone for 15 years. He took the money and fled with Jessica, a woman he had met at a dance club. Who would have thought that halfway through their escape, their boat would capsize? People only managed to fish his jacket and work ID out of the river. The mill concluded that he had drowned. His mother cried until she was half dead, her eyesight growing dimmer by the day. In her previous life, Sarah paid back the embezzled funds on his behalf and took care of her blind mother-in-law for 15 years. 15 years later, the old woman passed away, leaving Sarah the townhouse and her entire life savings. Sarah thought her suffering had finally turned to joy, but unexpectedly, David returned with his mistress and their illegitimate child. He demanded she hand over the entire estate. When she refused, he plastered posters everywhere, falsely accusing her of adultery, claiming she was scheming for his money and plotting murder. Everyone in the housing complex believed him. In those days, the toxic gossip of the public could truly drown a person. Every day, she was pointed at and cursed to her face. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, she threw herself into a well. But heaven had given her another chance. In this life, Sarah would not repeat the same mistakes with David. Sarah sprang up from the bed, pushed the door open, and stepped out. Her mother-in-law was sitting on the floor of the main living room, her hair disheveled, crying so hard she could barely catch her breath. "Sarah, David is gone. He fell into the river." "I know, Mom. Even though it was wrong for David to steal the company money, he was my only son. Now that he's dead, I don't want to live anymore." The older woman gripped Sarah's hands tightly, her face covered in tears and snot. In her previous life, Mary had been exactly like this, crying for 3 days and 3 nights straight until her eyes began to fail. Sarah couldn't let that happen again. "Mom, the dead cannot come back to life. If you collapse too, this family will truly fall apart." "But David is dead, but his union job at the mill is still there." Her mother-in-law's crying came to a sudden halt. She didn't understand why Sarah would bring this up. In those days, the guaranteed job replacement quota was more precious than gold. If a worker died or retired, an immediate family member could take over their position, inheriting that ironclad livelihood. David was dead. According to the rules, this position could be transferred to a family member. However, her mother-in-law was already elderly, and as a daughter-in-law, Sarah wasn't considered an immediate relative. In her previous life, this job quota had simply gone to waste. But in this life, she intended to use it to exchange for something else. "Mom, sit here and wait for me. I'm going out for a bit and will be right back." Sarah walked briskly out of the yard, cut through the alleyway of the company housing complex, and turned into a small, low-roofed house at the eastern end. The iron door was slightly ajar, and from inside came the heavy rhythmic sound of meat being chopped. A burly, broad-shouldered man was swinging a butcher knife, chopping bones so forcefully that the chopping block trembled violently. He had a thick, fierce-looking face, a rugged beard, dark skin, and bulging muscles on his arms. His apron was covered in blood. This was Jack. Everyone in the housing complex was terrified of him. But on her deathbed in her previous life, Sarah's mother-in-law had told her that Jack actually had the kindest heart of all. After Mary went blind, he quietly left pre-sliced meat at their door every single day. For 15 years he never said a word about it. Only then did Sarah realize that Jack had always had feelings for her mother-in-law. "Jack," Sarah called out from outside. He didn't look up, only answering, "Buying meat?" Sarah smiled. "Not buying meat. I want to make a deal with you." He stopped his knife and turned to look at her. "What kind of deal?" Sarah took a deep breath and said decisively, "My husband David is dead. His replacement quota at the textile mill, I'm giving it to you." The knife in Jack's hand almost fell to the ground. "What did you just say?" Sarah looked him straight in the eye and slowly continued, "But it's not for free. You have to marry my mother-in-law and move into our house." Jack thought she had lost her mind. His face darkened as he asked, "What the hell are you talking about?" Sarah repeated it once more. "I said, I'll give you the job quota, and you marry my mother-in-law." He glared at her, looking incredibly uncomfortable. "Sarah, your husband just died, and you're already playing matchmaker for your mother-in-law?" Sarah smiled and replied, "Do you think it's not a good match?" He responded angrily, "A good match, my foot. Your mother-in-law is 8 years older than me." Even though he said that, Sarah could clearly see a hint of red flush across his dark, rugged face. "So," she continued her persuasion. "So what? You're 32 this year, and my mother-in-law is in her early 40s. It's not like you can't make a life together. Besides, Jack, let me ask you, how much money can you save up butchering pigs for the rest of your life?" Hearing this, he fell silent. Butchers did make decent money in those days, but it wasn't official employment. It wasn't an iron rice bowl. Frankly speaking, they were just self-employed individuals. Not only did they lack insurance, but they were also looked down upon by others. Sarah pressed on, "A job at the textile mill. Do you want it or not?" His Adam's apple bobbed slightly. "A monthly salary of $42.50, plus a year-end bonus. Free medical care, and a pension when you retire." Sarah counted on her fingers, listing out the benefits for him one by one. "You could butcher pigs your whole life, and it still wouldn't compare to this ironclad livelihood." Jack slammed the knife into the chopping block and wiped the pig fat from his hands onto his apron. "Sarah, what's your angle here?" Sarah didn't beat around the bush. "My angle is getting someone to take care of my mother-in-law. David ran off with $3,000 of the mill's funds, and I have to pay that money back. I'm just a female textile worker making $28 a month. Even if I scrimp and save, it's going to take me 15 years to pay it off. During those years of paying off the debt, I won't have the time or energy to wait on my mother-in-law hand and foot. Her health isn't good, and her eyesight is getting worse by the day. I need someone to take care of her in my place. If you marry her and move in, it will be perfectly legitimate." The look in Jack's eyes changed. After a long while, he finally spoke. "Does Mary know?" "I'm going to tell her right now." Sarah turned to walk back, but after taking 2 steps, she stopped. "Jack, I know that all these years you've been secretly leaving meat at our door." His body visibly stiffened. "My mother-in-law is a good person, so she deserves someone who treats her well." With that, Sarah walked away. Upon returning home, she found her mother-in-law still sitting on the floor, her eyes red from crying. "Mom, I want to discuss something with you. David's replacement quota, I want to give it to Jack next door." Her mother-in-law was stunned. "Give it to him? Why?" "The condition is that he marries into our family and becomes your husband." "What did you say?" Her mother-in-law sprang up like a coiled spring. "My son's body isn't even cold yet, and you're already forcing me to remarry?" Sarah quickly crouched down and grasped the older woman's hands. "Mom, listen to me. David embezzled $3,000 from the mill. This debt is hanging over our family's head. I can't shoulder the burden of paying off the debt, supporting the family, and taking care of you all by myself." At this, her mother-in-law fell silent. "Jack might seem rough around the edges, but he has a good heart. If he joins our family, his salary will help us. With him taking care of you, I'll have the freedom to go out, earn money, and pay off the debt. Furthermore," Sarah paused for a moment, "you're only in your early 40s. You still have a long life ahead of you. You can't just live alone for the rest of your life." Mary's tears fell once again. "But I am David's mother. He just passed away. Mom, if David was truly a good son, would he have absconded with the company funds?" Sarah knew she had struck a nerve. Since childhood, David had never given anyone peace of mind. He was lazy, loved to goof off, and was all talk and no action, harboring a malicious heart. It wasn't that his mother didn't know this. She just didn't want to admit it. "Mom, I'm not forcing you. Just think about it for a couple of days." Early the next morning, Sarah went to the mill to ask about the replacement procedures. Director Lewis in the factory office pulled a long face. Sarah, your husband lost $3,000 of the company funds. Now that he's dead, who is going to pay this money back? Director Lewis, I will pay the money back, every single penny. But regarding the job replacement quota, I wanted to ask, does the live-in husband of an immediate family member count? Director Lewis pushed up his glasses. The policy doesn't explicitly say no, but it depends on the specific situation. Why? Is your mother-in-law planning to remarry? Yes. Who is the chosen man? Jack, from the east side of the housing complex. Director Lewis's glasses nearly fell to the floor. Jack the pig butcher? Yes, he's in good health and capable of doing the work. Director Lewis pondered for a long time before finally nodding. All right, as long as the paperwork is complete, the mill has no objections. On her way home, Sarah saw Jack standing in front of their house from a distance. He was holding a piece of pork belly in his hand, awkwardly scratching his head. Her mother-in-law stood inside the doorway, her face as red as a tomato. Seeing this scene, the corners of Sarah's mouth curled up slightly. 3 days later, Mary agreed. It wasn't because of Sarah's advice, but because Jack had stood in front of her door for 3 whole days. The first day, he brought meat. The second day, he brought bone broth. On the third day, he carried over half a pig, saying it was to nourish her. Her mother-in-law blushed and scolded him. You fool! Carrying half a pig into my house, what will people think if they see this? Jack scratched his head. No, Mary, you're too skinny, you need to eat some meat. With just that one sentence, her mother-in-law's tears welled up again. When David was at home, had he ever worried about whether she had enough to eat? The procedures were completed very quickly. Mary and Jack received their marriage certificate, and Jack officially married into the family. The replacement quota was also approved. Jack took off his butcher's apron and put on the uniform of the textile mill. The entire housing complex practically exploded with gossip. Is Sarah crazy, giving the job quota to a pig butcher? Mary is just as bad. Her son just died, and she's already remarrying, and to a man 8 years younger than her. How shameful. The gossip buzzed around like flies, but Sarah pretended not to hear any of it. In her previous life, she had seen enough of all kinds of people. When David was plastering those defamatory posters, these people had been the most eager to jump on the bandwagon. But when she jumped into the well, they all pulled their heads back like turtles, pretending they hadn't seen a thing. The words of such people weren't worth a single penny. Jack, however, was agitated by the gossip. It wasn't that he was angry at those people, but rather he was afraid that Mary would be upset. That evening, Sarah overheard him talking to her mother-in-law in the courtyard. Mary, if this puts you in a difficult position, I can move out and go back to butchering pigs. Her mother-in-law fell silent for a moment, then scolded Jack affectionately. If you dare to leave, I won't let you off easy. Sarah lay against the windowsill. Eavesdropping from the windowsill, Sarah almost burst out laughing. Days went by just like that. Jack didn't do badly at the mill at all. He was strong and hardworking. The heavy machine parts that others couldn't lift, he would hoist onto his shoulder alone and carry away. The workshop supervisor praised him as an iron ox, and before long, he was promoted to the head of the loading team. With his monthly salary, his bonuses, and the savings he had accumulated from butchering pigs, the family's living situation became much better than before. As for Sarah, she poured all her energy into making money and paying off the debt. During the day, she worked at the textile mill, and at night, she set up a stall at the night market to sell clothes she had sewn herself. In the early 1980s, private businesses were just beginning to sprout. Everyone was still wearing the drab workwear fabrics issued by their factories. Relying on her memories from her previous life, Sarah knew that it wouldn't be long before people started chasing after style and fashion. She asked someone to bring back fashion magazines from New York. She cut and sewed according to the patterns in them: bell-bottom pants, batwing shirts, and one-piece dresses. The first month, she took a loss. The second month, she barely broke even. By the third month, people began lining up to buy her clothes. By the end of the year, the $3,000 in embezzled company funds, both principal and interest, had been completely paid off. Sarah stood in front of the mill's finance department counter and slapped the final stack of cash onto the desk. Count it, Director Lewis. It's not short a single cent. Director Lewis counted it twice, the look in his eyes completely different from before. Sarah, I truly didn't realize you had this kind of capability. Stepping out of the mill's gate, Sarah let out a long sigh of relief. In her previous life, it had taken her 3 years of scrimping and saving to pay off this debt. In this life, it took less than 1. She would use those 2 extra years to do much bigger things. When she got home, her mother-in-law was busy by the stove, and Jack was chopping wood in the yard. Seeing her, he grinned, flashing his teeth. "Sarah, you're back? Are you hungry? Your mom is stewing some ribs." He had already gotten used to referring to Mary that way. Just then, Mary brought out a bowl of soup. Her complexion was rosy, and her eyes were bright and clear. In her previous life, at this very time, Mary's eyesight had already begun to fail. But in this life, with Jack around, she didn't have to shoulder all the hardships alone. Her eyes were saved, and she even looked several years younger. All of this, naturally, was thanks to Jack's hard work late into the night. Over the next few days, Sarah sipped her rib soup, but in her heart she was calculating something else. In her previous life, David hadn't shown up until 15 years later. But in this life, she couldn't afford to wait. She had to take the initiative and go on the offensive. The next day, she went to the police station and found Detective Miller, the officer in charge of David's case. "Detective Miller, I'd like to ask something. Has my husband's body been found yet?" Detective Miller flipped through the file and shook his head. "Not yet. We only recovered his jacket and work ID. The river currents were too strong. He was probably swept far away." "So is there any possibility that he isn't dead?" Detective Miller froze. "What are you implying?" "I just find it strange," Sarah said, carefully choosing her words. "He embezzled $3,000 from the mill. If he got caught, he'd face at least 5 years in prison. But if he's dead, the mill can only come after his family for the debt. The crime isn't severe enough to warrant risking his life. Tell me, Detective, do you think he might have done it on purpose?" Detective Miller pondered for a long time. "You mean he might have faked his own death?" "I'm not sure, but I don't think we can entirely rule out the possibility." He closed the file. "I'll reopen the investigation into this case. You head on home. I'll notify you if there's any news." Leaving the police station, Sarah felt a bit lighter. In her previous life, no one suspected that David had faked his death because everyone figured that dead was dead. The debt that needed to be paid had someone paying it. The filial piety that needed to be shown had someone showing it. But this time was different. She had to make sure the police had it on record. If he ever showed up in the future, this would be ironclad proof that he had fled to avoid punishment and faked his death to commit fraud. In the blink of an eye, it was the spring of 1984. Sarah's clothing business was booming, and the stall at the night market no longer had enough space for all her merchandise. She rented a storefront right next to the textile mill. The shop wasn't large, only a little over 100 square feet, but the daily revenue was a solid $20 to $30. In those days, that figure was already equal to the monthly salary of the textile mill's director. Her mother-in-law, Mary, helped her watch the shop, and Jack would come by after getting off work to help load and unload goods. Their days were busy, but prosperous. That afternoon, Sarah was taking measurements for a customer in the shop when a figure suddenly flashed past the door. Just catching a glimpse of it out of the corner of her eye made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. That silhouette was entirely too familiar. A tall, thin frame, sloped shoulders, and a slightly bow-legged gait. She lifted her head, but the figure had already disappeared at the end of the alley. That night, Sarah tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. Could David still be lurking around here? The next day, she went to find Detective Miller and told him what had happened the previous evening. Unexpectedly, Detective Miller's investigation had also made progress. "Sarah, your intuition might be right. We went to the docks and asked around for witnesses. One boatman said that on the day the boat capsized, he did see someone struggling in the water, but the person was swimming toward the opposite shore. Moreover, your husband's jacket was taken off completely intact. It wasn't torn off by the water. Not a single button was missing." Sarah gripped her knees tightly. "So he really did fake his own death. Right now, it's just a suspicion. We need more evidence," Detective Miller said, giving her a look. "Comrade Sarah, rest assured, we will continue to investigate this matter. If he really fled to avoid punishment, once he's caught, he'll face at least 3 years in prison." Sarah nodded and left the police station. Upon returning home, she found Mary sewing a button for Jack, who was sitting on a stool as obediently as a block of wood. "Sarah, why are you home so late today?" her mother-in-law asked with concern. "I made a trip to the police station." Hearing this, Mary's hands paused. "Did something happen?" "Nothing major, Mom. It's just about David's case. The police said there might still be some suspicious points that need to be clarified." Mary's face fell, and she asked no further questions. Jack glanced at Sarah and said in his gruff voice, "Sarah, if you need anything, just let me know." That night, Sarah lay in bed, reviewing everything in her mind. In her previous life, it was 15 years later that David returned, bringing Jessica and a son who was about 10 years old. This meant that after running away, he and Jessica had stayed together and even had a child. So what did they rely on to live all those years? What would happen when the $3,000 ran out? Sarah narrowed her eyes, thinking for a long time, and suddenly recalled a detail. In her previous life, when he returned, he was wearing a leather jacket, sporting a gold chain, and driving a small pickup truck. He didn't look like a destitute or impoverished person. On the contrary, he looked like a man who had struck it rich. Taking $3,000 down south to do some small-scale trading right during the economic reforms and open-door policy, snowballing it several times over, was entirely possible. In other words, he didn't come back because he couldn't survive. He felt the time was ripe and returned to harvest the fruits. What he wanted was the family townhouse in his mother's hands. He wanted the ancestral property. It was a pity he didn't know his mother had already remarried. Sarah rolled over, just about to go to sleep, when suddenly someone began pounding loudly on the courtyard door. Immediately after, a man's voice rang out from outside. "Mom, open the door. It's me, David." "What? You say you're David?" Mary's voice echoed in the courtyard. Sarah sprang up from the bed, threw on a coat, and walked quickly out of the bedroom. Outside the courtyard door, bathed in the moonlight, stood David. He was thinner than before, his skin tanned dark from the sun, but his facial features remained unchanged. He wore a jacket that was neither new nor old, and his hair was slicked back with pomade, looking exactly like a smuggler. Behind him was another person with long, wavy, permed hair, wearing a light yellow one-piece dress. That was undoubtedly Jessica, the woman who had run away with him. In her arms she was holding a child, just over a year old, who was looking around curiously with wide eyes. "Mom, it's me." David took a step forward, intending to push the door open. Jack used one hand to firmly block the door. "Who the hell are you?" David froze, sizing Jack up. Jack had a rugged, fierce-looking face and broad, muscular shoulders, wearing only a tank top. Just one of his arms was thicker than David's thigh. "Who are you? Why are you in my house?" Jack didn't say a word, only glancing at Sarah. She walked to the door, looking at David through the crack. "David, you're not dead?" A flash of awkwardness crossed his face, but he quickly forced a smile. "Sarah, I know you definitely hate me, but I had my own hidden difficulties. At that time, the mill was investigating the company funds. I was afraid of getting arrested, so my only option was to run away first. The boat capsizing afterward was an accident. I got swept downstream and was saved by someone. I originally planned to come back, but I was afraid of dragging everyone down, so you stayed out there and had a bastard child with this tramp?" Sarah coldly interrupted him. Jessica got angry. "What are you talking about? What are you doing here in the middle of the night?" Sarah ignored her, only looking at David. "Coming home, what else?" he argued defensively. "This is the townhouse my dad left behind. It's our family's ancestral property." "Wrong," she corrected him. "This is your mother's house. Your dad passed away early, and the house was already transferred to your mother's name, and your mother." Sarah stepped aside to let him clearly see the situation in the courtyard. Jack stood next to Mary, towering like a brick wall. "Your mother has remarried." David's pupils shrank, his gaze darting back and forth between Jack and his mother. Mom, you remarried?" With that, David tried to barge in. Jack firmly grabbed the back of his collar, hoisting him up in midair like a little chicken. "Who are you calling, Mom?" David's legs kicked a few times, his face turning bright red from being choked. "Let me go. Who the hell do you think you are?" "I am her man," Jack said in a deep, gravelly voice. "If you've got a problem with that, we can settle it right now." With his other hand, he pulled out his butcher knife from behind his back. The moonlight reflected off the blade, flashing with a cold, menacing gleam. David instantly fell as silent as a clam. Behind him, Jessica started screaming, "Murder! Murder!" Sarah immediately raised her hand and slapped her across the face. "Shut up!" She glared at her, and sure enough, Jessica instantly went quiet. Jack dropped David and gave him a push, neither too heavy nor too light. "If you have something to say, speak properly. Don't stand here screaming." David rubbed his neck and took 2 steps back, his eyes darting shiftily. He swallowed hard and completely changed his tune. "Mom, I know you hate me, but no matter what, I'm still your biological son. I don't object to your remarrying, but this house was left by Dad. It's our family's ancestral property. I'm the only bloodline of this family, so this house must belong to me." But Mary was no longer as soft-hearted as she had been in her previous life. She looked at Jack, then at Sarah, and finally, her gaze settled on David's face. "Don't call me Mom. You died over a year ago. Dead men don't have mothers." David was driven away, but Sarah knew he wouldn't let it go that easily. Sure enough, on the 3rd day, the large walls of the housing complex were plastered with posters. Every single sheet of white paper with black ink was written with shocking claims. "Sarah is an unfaithful wife. Her husband's body wasn't even cold before she committed adultery with a butcher. Sarah seduced Jack into marrying into the family to steal the family's ancestral townhouse. Textile mill purchasing agent David is not dead. The family committed fraud to steal his job replacement quota. That last sentence was the most vicious. This wasn't just throwing dirty water, it was directly pointing the spearhead at Jack's qualification for the job replacement. If David wasn't dead, then that replacement quota was essentially non-existent. That meant Jack's iron rice bowl was obtained through fraud. In an instant, the entire housing complex was buzzing with gossip. Sarah's husband isn't dead, so Jack's job is a fraud? I told you so. Who finds a man for their mother-in-law right after their husband dies? This woman doesn't have a righteous bone in her body. Sarah stood in front of the posters, tearing them down one by one. Jack walked up from behind her without saying a single word. Jack swung his fists, pounding them so hard that the defamatory posters in the wall's plaster peeled off in chunks. Whoever dares to put these up again, I'll chop off their hands, he roared, and the surroundings instantly fell dead silent. But while posters could be torn down, the suspicion in people's hearts could not be. The factory office quickly called Sarah in for a talk. Director Lewis sat behind his desk, looking extremely serious. Sarah, someone reported that your husband David might not be dead. How do you explain this? Director Lewis, I reported this matter to the police a long time ago. Sarah took out the receipt that Detective Miller had given her. 3 months ago, I informed the police of my suspicions regarding David faking his death. They are already investigating. Director Lewis took the receipt and examined it repeatedly. If it's verified that he really isn't dead, then the job replacement quota. If he isn't dead, then he is a fugitive who fled to avoid punishment, embezzling $3,000 of company funds and fabricating his own death, she said, looking Director Lewis straight in the eye. Director Lewis, this is no longer simply about a job replacement quota. This is a criminal offense. Director Lewis's expression shifted. Even though Sarah had paid off the $3,000, the mill had previously processed it as a bad debt. If David wasn't dead, it wasn't a bad debt. It was embezzlement and fleeing from justice. If reported to the higher-ups, this would be a major case. Go on home for now. The mill will handle this, he said. Sarah nodded and walked out. Returning to the housing complex, she saw David standing in front of her house from a distance. This time, Jessica wasn't with him. He was alone. He was leaning against the doorframe, and seeing her approach, he smiled. Sarah, have you thought it through? Thought what through? The family property, of course. You give the house back to me, and we'll drop the poster business. Both sides save face. Sarah sneered. David, do you really think you have any face left to save? The smile vanished from his face. Sarah, I'm advising you not to do this the hard way. I've already written a whistleblower letter, and sent it to the newspaper. Whistleblowing about what? Reporting the textile mill for violations in their job replacement process. Reporting you, Sarah, for using your husband's death to illegally seize the family's ancestral property. With that, he pulled out a cigarette, placed it between his lips, and lit it. Believe it or not, once this hits the papers, you and that butcher will both end up in prison. Sarah stared at him intently. David, did you know the police are investigating you? His hand froze. Investigating me? For what? She enunciated every word clearly. Fleeing to avoid punishment, faking your own death, and embezzling company funds. You ran away for a whole year without paying back a single cent of the company money. Now you come running back and even dare to put up those posters. Do you really think your family runs the law? David's expression finally crumbled. He stood up straight, his cigarette dropping to the ground. You called the cops? Of course. I reported you months ago. His pupils contracted sharply, and he spun around to run. But just as he reached the end of the alley, he slammed right into 2 uniformed officers. Detective Miller, accompanied by a young policeman, was blocking the exit. Comrade David, we're from the county police department. Please come with us. David was taken away. But things didn't end there. 3 days later, an anonymous whistleblower letter was sent to the textile mill. The letter detailed exactly how Jack had obtained his job position through a fraudulent replacement. The wording was sharp, even citing policies and regulations. It didn't look like something someone like David could have written. At the end of the letter, it explicitly demanded a thorough investigation into Sarah, her mother-in-law, and Jack, the so-called chain of benefits between the 3 of them. This time, the textile mill practically exploded. The labor union held an emergency meeting and demanded the formation of an investigation team. Director Lewis sought Sarah out for a talk. Sarah, this is blown up. The higher-ups intend to temporarily freeze the replacement quota. We'll wait for the investigation results and go from there. Jack was suspended from work. He went home and sat in the courtyard, quietly sharpening his butcher knife. Her mother-in-law sat inside the house, wiping her tears. "It's all my fault for dragging you two into this. If I hadn't agreed to remarry in the first place." "Mom, it has nothing to do with you," Sarah said, sitting down. Her brain was spinning rapidly. This whistleblower letter definitely wasn't written by David. With his education level, he couldn't even write a coherent letter, let alone a formal complaint. Then who was it? She asked for a copy of the letter to take home and read it over and over 3 times. Suddenly, she noticed a detail in the letter. It used the term position succession instead of job replacement. The difference between the two terms was subtle, but position succession was standard terminology used in policy documents. Ordinary people rarely referred to it that way. The person who wrote this letter was very familiar with official policies. Sarah suddenly thought of someone. The deputy director of the factory office, Arthur. He had always been eyeing Director Lewis's position, but unfortunately for him, he couldn't find a weakness. If there was a problem with Jack's job replacement, Director Lewis, the person who directly signed and approved it, would have to bear the responsibility. Arthur could then rightfully climb up to that position. He wasn't helping David. He was using someone else to do his dirty work. Sarah went to see Director Lewis and explained her analysis to him. Director Lewis's face turned pale, then green. "Arthur, that man. Director Lewis, you were the one who signed off on the job replacement procedure back then," Sarah pointed out. "If there's a problem, you won't be able to escape involvement, but if this whistleblower letter is, in essence, malicious slander, then the nature of the situation will be entirely different." Director Lewis pondered for a moment. "What do you mean?" "As long as the police determine that he faked his death, legally, he is considered dead. That job replacement is completely legal and valid. The whistleblower letter, in turn, will become an act of slander." 3 days later, there was news from Detective Miller. The investigation results were clear. The testimony of the boatman at the ferry crossing, combined with hotel registration records found in a downstream county town, was enough to prove that David had reached the opposite shore on the very day the boat capsized and left the following day with a woman. Detective Miller said the evidence was as solid as a mountain. He had intentionally faked his death and fled to avoid punishment, making the circumstances very serious. The police department officially issued a document confirming that in the fall of 1983, David had intentionally faked his drowning and absconded with company funds, showing signs of committing embezzlement and fraud. When this document was sent to the mill, the entire factory office, from top to bottom, fell silent. The issue of the job replacement was easily resolved. David was legally a dead man. The confirmation of his death preceded the replacement procedure. Therefore, the process was entirely in accordance with regulations. Arthur's scheme had completely collapsed. Jack was reinstated to his position. The day he arrived at the mill, his fellow workers in the workshop spontaneously applauded and cheered. Jack blushed, awkwardly lowering his head, looking just like a big, goofy fool. But the matter was not over yet. David, sitting in the detention center, still refused to give up. He declared that he had the right to inherit the townhouse and demanded to hire a lawyer. Sarah took a trip to the detention center to see him. Separated by a layer of iron bars, he looked much more pathetic than before. "Sarah, you are so vicious." "I'm not vicious. You brought this upon yourself," she replied coolly. "You think locking me up in here is the end of it?" He spat. "That house was left by my dad. I am his only son. Even if I go to prison after I get out, the house will still be mine." Sarah looked at him and suddenly smiled. "David, it seems you've forgotten one thing. You are now legally a dead person. Dead people don't have inheritance rights." David was sentenced to 4 years in prison for embezzling company funds, fleeing to avoid punishment, and faking his own death. Committing multiple crimes at once, he received a heavy penalty. But Sarah knew that 4 years later, when he was released, he would still come back to cause trouble. In her previous life, he was willing to wait 15 years. In this life, serving 4 years in prison meant nothing to him. Therefore, during these 4 years, she had to block all his possible paths. Step 1. Transferring the title. Mary officially transferred the title of the family townhouse to Jack. Since he had officially married into the family, he had every right to do this. With the marriage certificate, the household registration, and the property deed, all 3 documents complete, the process was entirely legal and compliant with regulations. Step 2. Splitting the household. Sarah discussed it with her mother-in-law and Jack, officially splitting the household and dividing their assets legally. Mary and Jack would live in the townhouse, while Sarah would move into the textile mill's dormitory. They would each mind their own business, and their finances would be completely independent. From then on, the townhouse belonged to Jack. Sarah would no longer have the slightest connection to David's family. When it came to splitting the household, her mother-in-law initially refused. She felt it would drive them apart. However, after listening to Sarah's reasoning, she could only agree with red, teary eyes. Nevertheless, she insisted that Sarah must visit her often. Step 3. Setting up a factory. Combining the savings from running her stall for over a year with the money left over after paying off the embezzled funds, Sarah had accumulated a total of $2,000. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough. She rented an old warehouse on the east side of the factory district, bought 3 sewing machines, and hired 5 nimble female workers. Sarah's garment factory officially opened for business. She didn't hang a signboard or set off firecrackers, she just went about her work quietly. In the spring of 1985, the first batch of ready-to-wear clothing was completed. Sarah transported the goods to the entrance of the provincial department store. She set up shop for one day and sold out completely. For the second batch, she increased production, and it sold out in 3 days. By the third batch, she caught the eye of the department store's purchasing manager. "Sarah, your clothing designs are very good. Can you supply us regularly?" "Yes, I can. I'll order 100 pieces in advance to test the market." On her way back that evening, Sarah calculated silently in her heart. At this rate, within 3 years, she could open a genuine garment factory. In the 1980s, there was gold everywhere. In her previous life, she had exhausted all her energy paying off debts and serving others. In this life, she had to channel all her energy into herself. Time flew by. In 1985, her garment factory expanded to 15 workers. In 1986, she received her private business license and officially registered it as Sarah's Garment Factory. At the beginning of 1987, the factory moved into a new industrial facility across from the textile mill, a 3-story building with over 50 workers. How prosperous was her business? The provincial department store placed a standing order of 2,000 pieces every month. Supply cooperatives from 3 neighboring counties also came to place orders. From a female textile worker, making $28 a month, she had become a $10,000 household, the first household in the county to amass such wealth. Meanwhile, Mary and Jack's life was also flourishing. Jack steadily climbed the ranks to become the head of security at the textile mill. No one mocked him as a pig butcher anymore. He treated Mary flawlessly. After work, he went straight home to cook, do laundry, and fix things around the house. Her mother-in-law smiled all day long, her eyes bright and clear, completely devoid of the tearful, blind appearance she had in her previous life. What surprised Sarah the most was that her mother-in-law got pregnant. At 43, it was a high-risk, advanced maternal age pregnancy. The doctor said there were risks and advised her to be hospitalized for observation. Without a second thought, Sarah took her mother-in-law to the best hospital in the province and found the best doctor. In the fall of 1987, Mary gave birth to a chubby baby boy. He weighed almost 9 pounds and had a booming voice. When he cried, the whole floor could hear him. Jack held his son, his rugged face blooming with a smile. "Sarah, do you think this boy looks like me?" "He does, he really does. He's just as dark as you," Sarah replied. He chuckled happily. Looking at this family of 3, a corner of Sarah's heart suddenly felt complete. In her previous life, her mother-in-law had lived in loneliness for 15 years, crying herself blind, and in the end, Sarah was the only one by her side when she passed away. In this life, she had Jack and a young son. She had a new life. It was all worth it. But right at this moment, Sarah received a letter sent from the prison. The handwriting on the envelope was all too familiar. "Sarah, just you wait. I'm getting out soon. David." Sarah threw the letter into the toilet. "David, if you want to come, then come." The Sarah of this life would not be throwing herself into a well anymore. In the spring of 1988, David was released from prison. He had received a 6-month sentence reduction, so he got out early. Hearing this news, Sarah didn't panic at all. Whatever was meant to happen would happen. He had just arrived sooner than she expected. On the 3rd day after his release, he went straight to the townhouse. Jack was in the courtyard teaching his son how to walk. The chubby toddler took wobbly steps, lost his balance, and crashed into Jack's arms, giggling merrily. David stood at the door, completely dumbfounded. He stared at the scene in the courtyard, the expression on his face crumbling layer by layer. Whose child is this?" When Jack saw him, his eyes instantly turned bone-chillingly cold. "My son. You? You had a child with my mother?" Mary walked out of the kitchen, her apron still dusted with flour. The moment she saw David, her face went pale for a second, but she quickly regained her composure. "You're out," she said. "Mom." David yelled. "How could you have a child with this kind of person? How could you?" Mary raised her hand, cutting him off. "My business is none of your concern. Leave. This is no longer your home." "This is my dad's house," David roared. "This is my husband's house," Mary said, pointing at Jack. "His name is on the deed. Your dad's name hasn't been on it for a long time." David staggered back, then turned and ran out. That afternoon, he showed up at Sarah's garment factory. The workers were busy on the production line, the clattering of sewing machines ringing out lively. He stood at the factory gate, looking at the large letters on the signboard, "Sarah's Garment Factory." "Sarah, you've struck it rich, haven't you?" Sarah stepped out of the office, leaned against the doorframe, and looked at him. "What do you want?" He licked his lips and said, "I thought about it for 4 years in there, and I figured things out. I don't want that house anymore, but you have to give me a sum of money." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that I am your husband." Sarah burst out laughing. "David, you probably don't know this, do you? During your 2nd year in prison, I filed for divorce from you." His face instantly fell. "What? I never signed anything," Sarah said unhurriedly. "I didn't need your signature. You were sentenced to prison for a crime. As the faultless party, I filed for divorce, and the court issued a legally binding ruling. The documents were sent to the prison. Even if you didn't sign for them, the ruling took effect just the same." His mouth hung open, closed, then opened again. The next second, he suddenly lunged forward and grabbed her by the collar. "Sarah, you destroyed my family and stole my house. How am I supposed to live?" Just then, a hand reached out from behind and twisted his arm back. Jack had arrived without anyone noticing. With one hand, he grabbed the back of David's collar, and in the other, he gripped his butcher knife. The knife was old, its blade chipped, but its cold gleam was as terrifying as ever. "I told you before," Jack said. "If you have something to say, speak properly." David was hoisted up into the air, his feet kicking helplessly, unable to touch the ground. When his eyes met the butcher knife, his whole body trembled violently like a leaf. You can't kill me. Murder is illegal." "I'm not killing anyone." Jack dropped him and patted his shoulder. "But I've butchered pigs my whole life. My hands aren't exactly gentle. If I accidentally slip, what do you think I should do?" David stumbled back a few steps, nearly falling over. Fine," he said, gritting his teeth. "Sarah, just you wait. Just wait." With that, he turned and ran away. Sarah thought he would come back to cause more trouble, but he didn't. Because the next day, Jessica came looking for her. She came alone without the child. Her long, wavy permed hair had been cut short. Her face was bare, without a trace of makeup, and she wore a faded, washed-out button-down shirt. "Sarah, I want to talk to you." "About what?" "I want to take my child and leave him, but I have no money and nowhere to go." She lowered her head and continued. "These past few years with him out there, our lives have gotten more and more miserable. He gambles. Whenever he loses, he beats me. Once he lost all the money, he came back to fight for the family property. When he couldn't get it, he took his anger out on me and the child." She pulled back her hair, revealing a long scar on her left temple. "I'm not asking for anything else. I'm begging you, please give my child and me a way to survive." Sarah remained silent for a long time. "Can you work in a factory?" Jessica lifted her head, looking at her in astonishment. "Room and board included, with a monthly salary of $80. The child can be sent to the Industrial Parks daycare." Jessica's tears instantly fell, and she cried, about to kneel down. "Don't kneel," Sarah said, pulling her up. "Just come to work. Draw a clear line between you and him, and that will be enough." A few days later, Jessica and her child moved into the factory's dormitory. David did come to cause trouble once, but as soon as he stepped through the factory gates, he was blocked by Jack, who was leading the men from the security department. He looked at the butcher knife in Jack's hand, then at the 4 burly security guards behind him. He didn't try to enter again. Later, Sarah heard that he had headed down south and never returned. Some people said he was working as a day laborer in Texas, some said he was drowning in debt at the casinos in Vegas, and some even said he was dead. But none of that had anything to do with her anymore. In the winter of 1988, Sarah's garment factory received the Outstanding Private Enterprise Award from the state. Standing on the stage to accept the award, she looked down and saw her mother-in-law and Jack in the audience. Mary was holding her chubby little boy, smiling so widely her eyes curved into crescent moons. Jack had his arm around her shoulders. His rugged, fierce-looking face wore a truly gentle and kind smile. Sarah raised the trophy high, her eyes suddenly growing hot with tears. "Sarah of the previous life, you endured enough suffering. The Sarah of this life has finally lived a proper, dignified life for you." Returning home that night, Sarah stood in the courtyard. The moonlight stretched out, casting the shadow of the old oak tree against the brick wall. A breeze blew past, carrying the distant, rhythmic hum of machinery from the textile mill. She took a deep breath. The air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and the aroma of home-cooked food. She could hear Mary singing a lullaby, accompanied by the deep rhythmic thuds of Jack chopping wood. This was life, her new life.
So satisfying, right? It just shows that karma always catches up to greedy people. When you stop playing the victim and build your own independence, you become unstoppable. Drop a comment below and don't forget to subscribe.